Hello everyone, and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. If you're watching the video version of this, you might notice something a little bit different, and for future record purposes, it will also probably very much date when this episode was released. I am Jeremy Graves. Thank you very much for checking out the show this week, and of course, I am joined by my good friend, who I think is also in a bit of a festive mood today, the one and only Mr. Andy Hanley. Andy, how the devil are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited about this summer special that we're recording.
Yep, the summer holidays are here. Winter has been and gone.
Yes, indeed. I was trying to think of some good Transformers-related Christmas jokes, but I couldn't think of any. So you'll just have to make your own. Please send them in for next year.
Yeah, we'll just call it out like it is from the beginning, everybody. On the day we are releasing this podcast, unless something changed in the back end of life, in which case then it's not, this is being released on the 24th of December. So Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone out there. Hope you're having a wonderful time no matter what you're doing and where you are. So Andy, I guess the first question I'm going to ask you is there anything in particular you are hoping that Roboto Santa will bring you this year?
No. I mean, maybe Laserbeak spying on me constantly. That seems like that's what all the cool kids are doing from having watched a bunch of this cartoon. So maybe that'll happen.
What if Roboto Santa found out what all the kids and everyone wanted for Christmas from having lots of Laserbeaks and buzzsaws?
I mean, that would be kind of terrifying, but also kind of cool. So sure, I'm up for that.
So today, everybody, we are continuing our journey into Season 2 of The Transformers, as this week we are covering episodes 9 through 12. Andy, to begin proceedings, as we are wont to do, thoughts overall on this crop of episodes that we are tackling today?
It's a very kind of mixed bag of stuff. There's... I mean, again, we'll get into my personal problems with Transformers, which is here's we're gonna go deep this one. This is a cartoon about robots that transform into things from a faraway planet, and yet I have problems with the realism of other things apart from that, like Atlantis. And it's it's a patently ridiculous position for me to hold, but somehow I can't quite get over that. But no, there's some good stuff in here as well. There's some good tried and trusted sort of bits of sort of cartoon storytelling, etc. And I didn't realise that I needed to see Optimus Prime play basketball quite as much as I now know that I do after seeing these episodes.
It was a fantastic moment, that which we will certainly get onto a bit later. For me, I completely agree with what you say in that this was a very mixed bag. I think that this collection of episodes had a lot of great moments as opposed to being great episodes overall. There are lots of little cool things peppered throughout all of these, but overall, and my opinion may change as we recap these, because it's been an interesting week, as it were, so sort of actually watching these in a haze of other things going on sometimes clouds your judgment at the time you're watching them. I might completely change my opinion by the end of the episode, but as things stand, that's kind of where I'm at on this.
Yeah, there are definitely good moments, and this is also the back and forth of sort of these season 2 episodes where at least some of them have they're basically spotlight episodes for particular characters, and that is just sort of nice to see sometimes, because it's just here's a character that doesn't really get to do much in the show, but they get a whole episode about their thing and kind of whatever their peccadillos or hang-ups or whatever are. And some of those, we had the Gears one last episode, which was kind of a bit dumb and goofy. The main one that we get in this batch of episodes is also kind of a bit dumb in its own way, but I sort of was also kind of charming. And I'm sort of curious, having not really watched a lot of season 2, to see more of these, and to see more of these sort of character-centric ones, especially when they're around lesser used characters that don't normally, get much time in the limelight.
Or in the case of one episode, a character we've literally never seen before his own episode.
Exactly. Which, again, is that other weird season 2 thing coming straight off of season 1, where everybody gets a backstory, but here it's just slap the new Transformer in, it'll be fine.
Before we go any further, everybody, a quick mention, as always, that if you want to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, you can. You can find us at StarscreamsPod on both of those platforms. And also worth mentioning, if you want to drop us an email, you can do so on starscreamsghostpod@gmail.com. You may have also heard us refer to a few times at this point throughout all the episodes that we're on YouTube as well. That is because you can watch this entire episode if you're listening to the audio version on YouTube. If you search for Starscream's Ghost Podcast on YouTube, you will be able to find our channel with every single episode in video form. So if you really just want to watch Andy and I discuss all this, you can indeed.
Yeah, it's the only way you can see me wearing a Christmas hat. So that may be the thing that makes you decide you never want to see this on YouTube. That may be the thing that makes you decide you want to see this on YouTube. I won't judge you either way.
And of course, mentioning YouTube, everybody, a reminder that the episodes we are watching in every single podcast that we record is done so via the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel. That is an official YouTube channel created by Hasbro that has all of the Transformers episodes on there. And so, also worth noting that the order we are watching all the episodes in is dictated by that as well, that being the broadcast order. So from there, everybody, let's go to our first episode of the day, that being episode 9, Atlantis Arise. The narrator, who we've not heard from in a while, Andy, so I was very happy to hear his dulcet tones once again, begins with the following. In their relentless pursuit of more energy, the Decepticons make an ominous discovery. As this voice is speaking, we see, quote-unquote, the Percep Vultures, which I legit didn't know that is what Laserbeak and Buzzsaw, first time we're seeing Buzzsaw in the show, by the way, I had no idea that's what they were referred to, and I loved that phrase so much.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that before, so I think they just kind of made that up on the spot. I'd like to think narrator guy just made up that word as he was like given that script of just like, I need to spruce this one up a bit. But yeah, the very first note I've written for this episode is it's insert swear words here, Buzzsaw, because I was very excited, having complained again incessantly about a character not turning up at all, and much as his appearance is kind of token in this, it's like, it's Buzzsaw, finally.
So they are flying over the ocean, and then inside Decepticon HQ, Megatron is receiving a video feed of what they are looking at. Quote-unquote from Megatron, "How dare you make me watch a dumb travel log, Soundwave? Recall Laserbeak and Buzzsaw at once." However, Soundwave then says, "Megatron, stick around. There's some more to show you." And then there is a radar of sorts indicating a large underwater city. The Decepticons then head out to the location and discover said city on the bottom of the seabed, but the Seeker Jets make a beeline to enter it immediately and are hit by an invisible force field. Then we are introduced to the character Nergil, which I had to write down in that way. Basically like fishmen, that's probably what I'll refer to them as throughout, who is the king of Sub-Atlantica, who communicates with the Decepticons telepathically. And unfortunately, Starscream tries to attack him, causing a brief scuffle between the man-fish, as Megatron called them, because they had hoped that the creatures that they have seen, the Decepticons, were different to previous passers-by of their domain. The scuffle ends with Megatron saying that he admires their warrior spirit, and that they have much to discuss together. Nergil then invites them inside the kingdom to have a conversation, but concerns are quietly raised between Soundwave and Starscream, because there's a bit of weird communication that happens that no one can understand, and it's because Nergil has scrambled his communications, though, as a little pro tip, if you actually just listen really carefully, it's just dialogue sped up incredibly fast. I didn't try to write it down, admittedly, but I just thought, no, I hear English words there. That's definitely sped up dialogue. Inside, we see that the kingdom has plentiful amounts of energy. No doubt catnip for Megatron. But the kingdom and its people have to remain deep underwater to be able to harness it. This then leads to an alliance between the Fishmen and the Decepticons to create Energon cubes, with Megatron saying that he will help the kingdom rise to the surface once again, while quietly scheming that he's just going to take the Energon and then be done with them. So Andy, let's pause there for a second, because there's a decent amount to unpack there, I suppose, but the idea that we've got like an underwater kingdom, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But what I think is very interesting is how technologically advanced they are. I think for me that was quite interesting, like the whole force field thing, the fact that they're communicating telepathically as well, and that they're just filled with such technology inside. That I think was probably the most surprising part of it, but still a cool thing in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of... I'm pretty sure Transformers is not the first, nor will it be the last cartoon that has like Atlantis as sort of a plot point in an episode, but it usually tends to be your sort of very typical, Poseidon with his spear kind of like vision of this lost city. And so, yeah, kind of having it be technological is sort of, it fits the Transformers brand and kind of makes it more interesting that way. It also, I guess, kind of like fills the gaps on one of my big issues, which is like, why has nobody noticed this before? But you can definitely have a like ... something technology that they've hidden themselves, and of course like the Decepticons have sufficiently advanced technology to actually notice them. So I'm willing to give that a pass. Like, this is exactly what I was talking about in terms of my issues of just like, Transformers aren't real. Like, spoilers for this podcast. I'm sorry if this is like telling you that Santa's not real or something. Transformers aren't real, but yet somehow like you introduce Atlantis, which is also not real, and that's somehow my tipping point of like, oh well, this is just stupid. Yeah, because it's like, taken logically, why am I okay with the Transformers as a whole, and then suddenly you throw in some fishmen as or men fish, as Megatron would have it, and suddenly like that's too much for me. So that's why I did like, compared to what I was expecting out of this episode, which was just me rolling my eyes going, oh, Atlantis. Like, it's actually, I ended up kind of, there are bits that I really, and things that I really like about this episode. Yeah, the technology is definitely one. The fact that I feel like we've gotten a viewpoint from like the start of this episode that Megatron clearly actually watches quite a bit of TV, because he's like, what is this, a travelogue? Like, what is this, a place in the sun? And it's just like, he's clearly been brushing up on his Earth TV while he's having some downtime, which I quite enjoyed.
On some of those non-existent cigarette breaks that we periodically see, it's actually him reading a paper or something.
yeah, exactly. He's probably got his holiday brochures. He's probably actually really into travelogues. They're just like, where do we go next? Oh, look, they've got like the world's biggest energy source, like perfect holiday destination. And I also just really enjoyed their like the sped up scrambled talking, just because there are so many ways you could have made that sound cooler than it was. It's like, oh, they've scrambled their communications, but it just like, it's just that really sped up high-pitched voice, which didn't really sell me on like, on some kind of anything sort of, anything menacing or malicious going on. It's like, why not just like reverse what they said? Like, play it backwards or something. But the kind of like squeaky, like, was just like, well, that's kind of ruined my immersion there.
Clearly, whoever made this episode had not seen the backwards episode of Red Dwarf.
Yeah, or not. Which, well, I guess Twin Peaks didn't exist at this point. So
I suppose, actually, in fairness, Red Dwarf probably didn't exist at that point either, or at least not season 3. Come to think of it.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a clear pass. What else could they possibly have done? We'll give them that one.
Send us a tweet if you know. Let us know if there's something else they could have done. So, at Autobot HQ, the Dinobots, Hound, Wheeljack, Bumblebee, and Spike are playing American football when they are summoned by Prime as they've detected an unusual energy reading in the Atlantic Ocean. Bumblebee, Hound, Brawn, Wheeljack, and Spike volunteer to check this out. We see some cool sequences of the Autobots driving along the ocean bed when they reach a city, and Spike, now in scuba gear, he's in shorts and an air tank, quite frankly. Definitely, not cold on the deep, dark bed of the ocean floor. I won't get into that now. That's a minor detail. But he says this could be the legend of Atlantis. Suddenly, they are attacked by a group of fishmen, and Spike is called a land slug, which I thought was a great insult for humans.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess sea slugs are a thing, so it sort of makes sense if you're an Atlantean.
The Seeker jets join the fray, and Bumblebee refers to them as underwater air pollution, which I thought was another cool little thing there. Getting some good quips in the early going.
And also, like, we didn't mention, like, you know, that the Seeker Jets just fly underwater in this episode. And, if we're going to question the science here, I have questions about that. I'm pretty sure that doesn't work, but hey, I'm no Transformers expert.
I like the way it's literally this episode that has broken all logic now for Transformers.
Yeah, well, it's weird because we've had like the Autobots have like driven underwater in multiple episodes, and somehow again I'm kind of fine with that. But once a jet does it and flies underwater, I'm like, no, sorry, no.
You were fine with water skis on the surface.
Water skis are also fine. I mean, aerofoils are all good. Cars driving undersea. I mean, you know, I guess like James Bond had like a submarine car or something, but I don't know, somehow planes undersea. No, that's just too far. I'm sorry.
The Autobots retreat to a cave, but Wheeljack ends up blocking off the cave so that they can all exit, and he basically takes one for the team. Wheeljack is taken prisoner by Nergil, and once again, scrambled communication is used to instruct his guards to take him, that being Wheeljack, to his laboratory. Again, Soundwave and Starscream are suspicious of this, and Soundwave is able to decode what Nergil said and replay it back on his tape deck. And that's when we find out that Nergil has got some bigger plans in the works for both the Autobots and Decepticons. We then see Subatlantica rising from the depths in pursuit of Bumblebee and co. on top of the water, which... just this bit specifically, Andy, I felt this was a very big escalation in where we were at in the story, because we had gone from an underwater fight, Autobots were escaping through a cave, is Spike going to run out of air, was the first thing I thought, because I thought they were buried in the cave. And then suddenly, Subatlantica rises, and then the other Autobots are on top of the ocean, trying to drive/boat away, and then they're being chased by the city. Like, a lot happened in about 20 seconds.
Yeah, and I mean, not least because, you know, as we've discussed, you know, this Atlantis has sort of been hidden from, you know, human eyes for however long it's been in existence, and no one has ever known of it, and suddenly it's just like, these robots are annoying, let's just surface the entire city to try and, like, chase them. It's like, well, that's your cover blown, isn't it?
The Autobots get back on land and figure out that the underwater city is bound for Washington, D.C. We finally got to that point in the series, folks. And Megatron, Soundwave, and 2 of the Seeker Jets fly on ahead, and we then see Nergil having a monologue to himself about how they, the Fishmen, will control everything and be rid of the Decepticons. But remember how I said there were only 2 Seeker Jets that went? That's because Starscream stayed back and overheard this monologue. Silly Nergil. We cut to a whale parade? That doesn't make sense in my notes.
I mean, it's underwater. That could have happened. Like, I don't remember it, but it could have happened.
I think it's meant to be whole parade, but that's a good typo from me. I'll take that. We cut to a whole parade of Autobots rolling into Washington, D.C. as the Decepticons and the Subatlanteans are wreaking havoc on the city and use a device to activate an energy dome around Washington, D.C. as well, meaning no one can enter or leave. A firefight breaks out with Prime's crew heavily outnumbered. We then cut to Bumblebee infiltrating Subatlantica. They find that Wheeljack has been impaired by a, quote-unquote, magnetic dysfunction ray, as Nergil works on him, as I've written down. Starscream tries to interfere, but is hit by the ray too. As Starscream put it, traitorous Electro-Toad, you shall pay! Again, great quotes here. But Nergil, interestingly to note though, says that while the ray was effective on Starscream, not quite as effective as it is on Autobots. And that is ultimately his downfall, saying that out loud, as he leaves the lab and gives Starscream a chance to try and actually tamper with Wheeljack, because he's not completely incapacitated. And then Bumblebee tackles Starscream, now completely incapacitating him. This gives them the chance to sort out Wheeljack, and then they race after Nergil because they know what is up and what his ultimate plan is. Back inside the energy dome, the firefighting continues. Nergil arrives and basically incapacitates every Autobot under the sun. Like, if you were playing, like, I don't know, Halo or Apex Legends or something, and you were trying to accumulate some score points and like a kill-death ratio, Nergil has your number on this. That's what I'm saying about that. But he hasn't realised that Bumblebee and Wheeljack are now also inside the dome because they followed him in while the entrance was open. And they try to warn their comrades, but at this point, they are too late. A lot has happened there, Andy. And I will say, regardless what we ultimately think of the Fishmen and what I'm assuming is an enemy that we will never see ever again, they're kind of like the one and done filler enemy, I actually kind of like how formidable they are as an actual enemy. Like, they've actually downed pretty much the entire Autobot contingent. They've actually got their number. They're actually very intelligent for a one and done enemy.
Yeah, and I mean, I always enjoy the kind of like two different evil forces join up kind of episodes of any sort of cartoon like this, because you know that they're both like treacherous and they're both going to try and kind of double cross each other and kind of do one another over, and that's always kind of a lot of fun because you get to see two people who are just kind of like, you're going to betray us, aren't you? No, you're going to betray us, aren't you? So all of that is enjoyable, and yeah, like this story actually, like, despite my misgivings about the whole Atlantis thing, it kind of ends up in a pretty solid place, like, narratively. I really like the fact that it ends up in Washington, D.C. and actually kind of makes good use of it. I'm trying, because I feel like we've maybe had, like, locations name-checked, or American locations name-checked in, like, the series before, but this is the first time it really kind of goes for it, and it's not just, we'll name New York or whatever because it's populous. It's like they're in Washington, and then they actually make very direct use of landmarks like the Washington Monument, etc., as part of the story, and that's kind of fun, like, that they get to do that, and it's not just sort of, we've named a place because it's sort of, and given it a vague kind of, wow, this is sort of what this part of the world looks like. It's a very direct, like, hey, this is Washington, like, especially, American kids sat at home watching this, like, you've probably either been there or at least seen a heck of a lot of it on TV, and like, these landmarks, it's like when things are set in London for us as, like, two Englishmen is like, oh yeah, no, you know the sites, when they have the Shard or whatever, or the Tower of London, all of those
Big
things.
Ben,
are just like,
yeah,
Big Ben. They're all like recognizable landmarks, and I'm always kind of in for that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, because what was it we had in the last podcast? Was it like Geocentral Africa or something? Like, yeah, name check like that. We've had Peru in one episode, I think, as well. Had the multiple dams as well, which I'm sure each had a name from season 1.
Yeah, and I think some of those were kind of like real locations potentially, but it's like, this is a very clearly recognizable one that sort of marked it out to me as like, because even like, when they drive in there, there's like what is it, Chesapeake Bay, which is like, that sounds like a made up place. Like, oh no, that is actually a real place. So yeah, all of that's kind of enjoyable.
So, you mentioned about how they were utilising some of the actual bits in Washington, D.C. specifically. Let's get on to that, because that's in the next round of notes. So, Wheeljack sends out an Autobot... sends out an Autobot, that's not a phrase. Wheeljack... I'm doing good today, everybody. Can you tell already? I'm going to leave that in the edit. I'm not fussed. Wheeljack sends out an SOS for the Dinobots, who... What I loved was Grimlock basically going, Autobots are bitten off more than they can chew again, hey? And then in the end, they end up going to Washington. And we get a really fun moment here when Megatron just removes the statue of Abraham Lincoln from the chair and then just sits in the chair and pretty much just says, this is a great throne. I like this.
Yeah, I love it. Again, that's exactly the kind of stuff that I like about this, where, you just get to use actual monuments and things and just kind of mess around with them. And that's a really great moment.
We also see that both Decepticons and Sub-Atlanteans are unaware that they are both planning to be rid of each other in the very near future as well. So tensions are rising slowly but secretly. All the Dinobots arrive outside of Washington, D.C., and we see them work their magic, as I've written it down, Andy, to muscle their way through the energy dome. But I'm saying that because it was a really cool sequence of the Dinobots using each of their own abilities to break through this energy dome. And with the way that the music was going as well, it was just a really fun, supercharged moment. And once again showed why the Dinobots are awesome.
Yeah, it always feels like the animators are excited when they get to do Dinobot bits as well, because it sort of I mean, when you think about it, most of the Transformers, it is just kind of like pew-pew lasers, and occasionally the laser will do a different thing. Like, you get some sort of fisticuffs, but there's a relatively limited sort of palette that you can work with action-wise. Whereas the Dinobots, because, they breathe fire and, like shoot lasers out of their tail, and they've got a more varied kind of set of abilities that it seems like they always really enjoy animating. And as much as it's kind of weird that it turns out that this sort of like force field dome thing seems like it was just glass, basically, judging by this animation. It was a good moment, and it's one of those really subtle little bits of writing of just like, this is kind of impenetrable from anybody on the outside, and then the Dinobots just rock up and just smash straight through it, which again just adds to the fact that it's like, these guys are cool and really strong, so good on them.
From here, we get what I love this line from Grimlock. Again, can't do the impression as established on previous podcasts, but I'm going to say the line. Me, Grimlock, here again, Optimus Prime, to pull your diodes out of laser fire. Just a great little burn. But before we see Grimlock free Optimus Prime from being immobilized, we actually see Grimlock and Megatron have a scrap with each other. This was great. And I want to see more fighting between the two, because this was a great little scuffle they had.
Yeah, it's definitely something that... Yeah, I do hope we see more of that, because that sort of... Again, given how the series has sort of set things up, repeatedly now about sort of Grimlock being arguably stronger than Optimus Prime in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, just let him have at Megatron a bit more. Let's see what happens. I'm in for that.
Nurgle arrives and is trying to get an aim on Grimlock to incapacitate him, but he can't. So he just basically goes, you know what, I'll just shoot both of them, far easier. At which point, Starscream arrives, calls him a traitor, and makes it clear, as much as possible, that they, the Decepticons, and the Subatlanteans are now enemies. Spike and Bumblebee are able to get the weapon away from Nurgle and leave it to Grimlock to break the thing into oblivion. With the Autobots all now restored and no longer incapacitated, the enemies retreat. But Megatron leaves the Autobots a going-away present in the form of trying to shoot down the Washington Monument, which Prime is able to catch, and Grimlock just kind of appears behind him and sort of just goes, well done, Prime, well done, let me help you put that back.
Yeah, and that's quite funny as well, because you kind of feel like Grimlock's kind of taking the mickey and being a bit sarcastic about it, but Optimus Prime is very just like, oh no, thank you so much, you've been very useful as well. And it's just like, no, Prime, I don't think that's quite what he was going for there, but
silly Prime. So the Monument and Abraham Lincoln are restored to their rightful places, and the Autobots roll out to catch up with their enemies. On Subatlantica, Megatron demands answers from Nurgle, but the Autobots arrive on the base, and the Dinobots, for some reason, Andy, are loaded into the trailer of Optimus Prime. I want to know why, because they can fly.
Yeah, maybe.
And also, how did they get to Washington in the first place?
Well, yeah, exactly. Maybe they were just tired. Or again, like, this is one of those weird kind of like sort of Transformers pseudoscience of like, maybe they have a flight range that they exhausted getting to Washington and therefore can't fly back without refueling, but it's all done without actually ever being mentioned, so you're just making it up as you go along, basically, which is probably what the writers were doing as well. So, hey ho.
And I think in one of my favourite lines in reference to the Dinobots, Optimus Prime just says, okay, Dinobots, time to act prehistoric.
Yeah,
it's a great line, and then they just go on a rampage. It's so good. But Nurgle now plans to use the energy stockpile on Subatlantica to blow up the city and everyone else on it. Spike, Bumblebee, and Wheeljack pursue him into the depths of the city, but don't realise that Soundwave has sent Ravage and Rumble after them too. As Nurgle is about to activate the self-destruct sequence, as I've written it down, it's basically dropping like a rod into a pool of something. Rumble realises that Starscream was telling the truth. Nurgle is trying to betray them, and causes a rumble to try and buy some time to stop him. Wheeljack then almost nearly stops Nurgle, but Nurgle triggers the sequence. Everyone is now evacuating the city, and we see an almighty explosion and Subatlantica sink. With Spike surmising, we won't hear from Nurgle again for a long time. And then the episode ends. And I think as we've established, Andy, we'll never hear from Nurgle again.
Yep, I think he is done and done.
So that's the end of the episode, mate. Thoughts on that final sequence of events?
Yeah, it's pretty solid. It's pretty good. Like it's sort of again enjoyable seeing all the kind of treachery and counter treachery sort of come to a head. Some really good lines, like I think Megatron calls Starscream a dribbling dirt bucket at some point, which was very good, very choice. I think it was Starscream calls. I think it's one of the Dinobots, or at least maybe it's Nurgle actually calls him a treacherous hydro weasel, which is also very good. But yeah, that's some good solid Transformers action stuff. All the bits again about and around Washington, just kind of. It just adds an extra layer to it where it's not just like a random, factory or whatever. It's somewhere recognizable. It it helps raise the stakes and just make the whole thing a lot more interesting and fun to watch.
So from there, everybody, let's move on to our next episode. That being episode 10, Attack of the Autobots. The episode begins with the Decepticons launching an attack on Autobot HQ. The Seeker Jet, along with Soundwave, Rumble, and Laserbeak are the culprits. Despite the Autobots valiantly trying to fight off their ambush, including Prowl having a cool moment using a grappling rope-like device to thwart Laserbeak, we see Rumble create a ravine and Prime and Ratchet fall down. If on your Transformers bingo card you had a Transformer falling into a ravine, you may check that box now. Before we cut nearby to Megatron and Starscream. Starscream sprays something at Megatron, and suddenly Megatron is invisible. Or in animation terms, it's just his outline, because that's how cartoons work, everybody. His plan is to use his invisibility spray to attack the Autobots. That's pretty much what he said in that phrase, and I thought, that's a really clever idea. If you're invisible, they can't see where you are. And then Starscream is also sprayed. And then, to counteract what they said, they sneak into Autobot HQ. They make for the Autobot recharging chambers. Because, Andy, that's been a thing this entire show. Recharging chambers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've never really seen them go to sleep or, how they do that whole thing. So it sort of makes sense. It's an interesting little bit of Transformers lore that, again, will probably never be seen or heard of again. But, it's good to see it.
But that said, though, it does actually add credence, maybe, to your theory of there only being so much energy involved. And actually, didn't Bumblebee in one episode at some point, literally run out of energy, and he got stuck in a ravine?
Yeah, I mean, probably. I mean, there have been so many reasons why Bumblebee has got stuck in a ravine at this point. It's kind of hard to remember them all. So,
in terms of the recharging chambers, just to make a note of it out loud on here, I've described them on my notes as looking like a stasis bed or something like you would see in Star Trek or something. Something akin to that.
Yeah, they're kind of like your typical, sort of hyper sleep kind of thing that you'd see in an alien movie or whatever. So yeah, pretty sort of, dyed-in-the-wool designs for that kind of thing. But hey, there are only so many things you can do with the bed. So
there you go. And Megatron now adds, quote-unquote, a personality destabilizer to the device that's linked to the recharging beds. Then they head out, as it's alluded to the fact that their invisibility spray only has a certain time limit on it. And Megatron makes it known that when the Autobots recharge, they will experience a transformation they won't expect. The hit-and-run style attack has the Autobots puzzled, to say the least. And they are also expecting that something else is clearly afoot, because they know the Decepticons. They know at this point, hopefully. And I kind of actually just want to pause for a second, because I love the idea that the Decepticons have this invisibility spray. And I'm just thinking, I said it a minute ago, as a concept, that's a really good idea. Attack them while you're invisible. And then, I will be honest in saying, Andy, I was a bit disappointed when they then just snuck into Autobot HQ.
Yeah. I mean, why not? Well, I mean, I would say why not wreck Talatran 1? We'll get there, I guess, before we can check that off our bingo card. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's an interesting kind of is an interesting, like, turning the tables, because we've had so many times where Mirage has made himself invisible to, like, mess with the Decepticons' plans, that it's kind of nice to see the boot on the other foot for once. It's... Maybe this is just, like, you know, several decades of sci-fi movies after this, but having an invisibility spray seems very low-tech and kind of low-key compared to all the, like, you know, you think of all the, like, cloaking devices and, like, optic camouflage that you get in, like, a Ghost in the Shell or something. This feels far more kind of phoned in of just like, I know it's a spray, it makes them invisible. But yeah, I'm into the idea. I'm also... Again, talking about things that I really like that are kind of basically every cartoon from this era did at some point. The whole, like, we're going to make the goodies into the baddies by insert, you know, thing here. I was quite excited about this, of just like, oh good, they're going to make the Autobots bad guys. I want to see this.
Well, you mentioned that Prime and Ratchet are the first ones to use the recharging station since its modification by Megatron. Quote unquote from Ratchet. Ah, nothing like a good Energizer recharge to give the bolts some volts. I like that line.
I suspect that's probably like the marketing tagline on these like recharge chambers, like give your bolts some volts.
buy one, get one free.
Yeah. Personality destabilizer not included.
Teletran then informs the Autobots of a rocket launch at Harding's Space Center containing a new solar-powered generating satellite designed to provide unlimited energy to the world.
Finally. We had an entire episode without anybody designing or inventing anything to provide enough energy to the planet. But we're back at it again. Thank God for that.
As Prime is relaying the importance of what's just been said to everyone else, the personality begins to change. We see the eyes glowing red a little bit, and what Megatron alluded to is now starting to take effect. Prime, Hound, Ratchet, Bluestreak, Brawn, Windcharger, Trailbreaker, and Skyfire have all been impacted by this change. Teletran detects the evil presence and begins having a conversation with Megatron, somehow, who makes it clear now that the Autobots are their kind, are his kind of mechanisms, I think is the phrase that he used. Megatron's first command, because he also now can control the Autobots seemingly, is to silence Teletran, which Prime does by punching a hole through the console. So as you alluded to, Andy, well, in fact, no, you know what, Andy? You know what this means? Days since there was a catastrophe in Autobot HQ, we're back to zero.
Yep, Teletran. I mean, God, like, the repair bill on Teletran must be, like, just exorbitant at this point, because just every couple of episodes at best it just gets wrecked. But here we are again. Teletran has been ruined.
Outside of Autobot HQ, we cut to Jazz and Bumblebee with Spike and Sparkplug inside Jazz, driving back to the Ark. With Jazz musing about having a speaker system tuned up by the humans. We then get to see a practical test, as I have noted it down, of Jazz's speaker system, which looks very loud. So much so that he brings down boulders from a rock edge. That's how loud it is. Bumblebee heads back into HQ, but notices something is up with Teletran. And then Bluestreak appears, and is now evil Bluestreak at this point, grabs Bumblebee, basically going, "You should go and have a recharge." And then just dumps him into one of the recharging chambers. At this point, Jazz appears, is really confused at what the heck is going on. Bluestreak starts to attack him, and Jazz is able to get the upper hand by, quote-unquote, according to Sparkplug, conking out his reset relay. The phrase conking out is just always so good. Bumblebee is freed, and everyone is confused as to what the heck just happened. We then cut to Sparkplug fixing Teletran, who is able to relay, once fixed, that all the Autobots have had their personalities changed because of Megatron's device. Just to pause there for a second, Andy. A lot of stuff has gone on. Any thoughts or feelings you want to convey, first of all, before I perhaps add one or two things myself?
Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint, like, much as I said, I was excited to see, like, oh, you know, I like the goodies get turned into baddies thing. The thing that I don't like about this episode so much is that it's just, like, Megatron commanding them what to do. Like, I think it's far more interesting if it's just, like, you know, we've kind of reverse the polarity of their circuits, or insert whatever like science jargon you want here, that just makes the Autobots do bad things that aren't really controlled by anybody. Like, that feels far more kind of malevolent than, because this is sort of, you know, almost feels a little bit like, you know, the episode we had in our last podcast episode where, you know, we had like, you know, fake Optimus Prime being controlled by Megatron. It's kind of like, it feels like a variation on that theme, whereas I was sort of more into the idea of just the Autobots just like of their own free will start doing bad stuff because they've been like weirdly reprogrammed, which I would have found more entertaining. I will also say I feel like this episode made me realise that there should be more Jazz in this show. Like, Jazz features a fair bit, but he's always sort of drops in with the odd line or two. I like it when Jazz gets a lot of dialogue because it's really good, and Scatman Crothers is great, and it was really nice to have an episode where he gets to talk a lot and not just kind of have the odd quip here and there. So I was a big fan of having a bunch of Jazz in the first chunk of this episode.
Agree on the Jazz thing. I'd love to see more of him. And with regard to like the Autobot personality thing, I 100% agree. The idea that it's like the reverse morality thing has far more clout to it. So, you know, Prime wants to save people. Destroy people is the opposite of that in theory. It's like kind of that idea of it, I think, has far more credence to it. But who knows? Maybe it was like a thing of, we can't do that on a Saturday morning kids show. We just can't.
Yeah,
but,
I mean,
who knows?
I wonder if it's more that, like, because a lot of, I feel like I've watched a lot of cartoons where they do just exactly that, and it's just like a complete, like, 180 to the characters. Maybe they felt like they had to add an extra layer to it just to differentiate it from, like, well, every other show does this. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that, of just actually trying to do something a bit more unique, whereas I'm sat here being like, no, I want the thing that every other cartoon did.
Well, speaking of unique, Andy, you know what was unique? Seeing Optimus Prime, Prowl, I've written down, it might not have been though in hindsight, and Brawn arriving at an Air Force base and beginning to just rip up airplanes. Just utterly trouncing these airplanes, just causing havoc, wreaking chaos, whatever the correct phrase is. They were messing some stuff up. Bumblebee and Spike head to the air base as well to try and stop them, much to the protest of Jazz and Sparkplug. We then see Ratchet and Hound arrive at a laboratory of some kind. It wasn't name-checked or anything, to my knowledge. Tasked with getting the plans for the solar satellite that's on the rocket. That's what Megatron's asked them to do. The inventor, Dr. Harding, is inside with the plans. We see some, what I've written down as crazy animation, with Ratchet and Hound somehow crouching through corridors, which I found incredibly amusing. just a very, very weird visual. They get to Dr. Harding's office trying to capture her and the plans, but she ends up just breaking a window with a chair and jumps out of the window and somehow just lands on a parasol totally fine before running away. This sequence, Andy, was wild and great.
Yeah, well, I mean, this character seems pretty hardy because, you know, she with the pun not entirely intended until I said it, but like, you know, she goes through some stuff in a very brief period of time in this episode and somehow like comes out of it all unscathed. So like, you know, I mean, again, some superhuman stuff going on here.
We'll get on to what you're referring to in a second, because I've got things to say about what happens to her in a few minutes. Back at the Air Force Base, Prime's crew are still on a wrecking spree, with Bumblebee and Spike arriving, as mentioned before. Bumblebee tries to talk to Prime, but literally just gets swatted away like a fly. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Megatron and Soundwave break into the launch control area of this rocket base and reprogram the controls, despite not having the Doctor's plans. That's not apparently a major issue at this point, which begs the question, why do you need them then? Their goal is to be aboard the rocket in 2 hours, which will be bound for Cybertron with the secret of perpetual energy. With them. Sorry. Back at Autobot HQ, Sparkplug has made an attitude exchanger. These names. Which will drain away the bad energy created by Megatron's device, and replace it with purifying ions. It's like, Apparently, Andy, that's what attitude is. It's purifying ions.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a mineral water like commercial or something at this point. But sure, like I'll buy whatever spark plug is selling.
At this point, Blue Streak is now awake once again, and this is the perfect opportunity to test this new device, which works. They attach it to his leg, and all is well. The way they did this, Sparkplug basically just attached it to his leg while Jazz was distracting him, because Jazz is great. We need more Jazz. Now that they know that the device works, Sparkplug begins making more. Elsewhere, Dr. Harding is running away from Hound and hides herself in a dumpster, or as I actually initially wrote it, Andy, a biffa bin.
yeah. Depending on your location, listen to this podcast. Delete as applicable.
Hound picks up the bin with her inside, but Jazz appears. Hound throws the bin towards Jazz. Jazz, not knowing there's a human inside, seemingly, dodges it. This bin bounces off the wall, crashes down in a heap. The Doctor somehow just pushes the lid away, is totally fine and runs away.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like in terms of things in these episodes that made me laugh, and there are quite a few of them. Like this was definitely one of them. Of just like, okay, I don't know how any of this is okay, but I'm glad you're all right, having been thrown by a transformer while you're in a bin.
Ratchet is also nearby at this point, and Jazz and Sparkplug are able to restore both Ratchet and Hound. Back at the Air Force Base, Bumblebee is still trying to take on all three of his comrades there in a 3-on-1 handicap match, if you want it in wrestling terms. We then cut to a jet in the sky with some humans inside, when a Skyfire appears and blows up the jet. The humans were fine though, don't worry. Jazz, Hound, Blue Streak, Ratchet, Sparkplug, and Dr. Harding see this happen. Hound is able to successfully fire one of Sparkplug's attitude exchanger devices from his gun, just fires it in the air, and is able to actually get Skyfire, and all is well with Skyfire once again. They all take off and head back to the Air Force Base. When they get to the Air Force Base, now knowing that Hound's plan from a few moments ago worked perfectly fine, Hound is able to reset Blue Streak and Brawn accordingly, but Prime dodges the shot that was aimed at him. And also, Andy, this perhaps is a bit for debate here. Prime, as it's phrased in the show, splits into his three components. I'm assuming that's Prime, then Roller, and I've just written down a turret.
Yeah, it's basically, the gun part of his turret, which, again, I think that is, like, canon across everything, that he actually has, like, three component parts there, in terms of, like, his brain that he can kind of, like, compartmentalize. I mean, the interesting part about this is sort of what comes... Well, actually, no, it does sort of play into this later, like, the idea that he is one personality, but he can split parts of himself off into the others. And this episode, one of the interesting things it does in this moment is it plays with that idea a little bit.
Indeed. So, Hound is able to shoot Roller and the turret, but Prime, I guess, is still on the loose, but they only have one device remaining. Bumblebee takes the device and heads to Prime, who, as you've just alluded to, Andy, is showing signs of what I've written down as mental conflict. Because 2/3 of him have now been restored, but you've got the arguably the bigger, more dominant component, but just the one of the three still being having been adjusted by Megatron. This is really badly phrased today for me, but I'm just going to go with it. And eventually Bumblebee is able to get through to him long enough to attach the device, and then once Prime is restored, we actually see a really cool, touching moment where Bumblebee's been trying to get through to Prime all this time. It's like, Prime, it's me, it's your buddy, Bumblebee, it's me. Swatted away. But now, Optimus Prime actually embraces him and hugs him and just goes, thank you, little buddy. It's a really cool moment. I really like that.
Yeah, and there's actually, like, I didn't mention earlier on, like, Bumblebee's voice acting is actually, like, really good when he's trying to, like, talk Prime out of, like, what's going on? Like, there's a genuine sense of, like, distress of, like, oh my god, like, you know, my leader and friend is just, like, acting all messed up and I don't understand why. And it's, like, really good, because, you know, Bumblebee is so often just used as sort of comic relief or sort of like human interface with Spike and what have you, like doesn't necessarily get a lot of meaty dialogue to work with, but actually like that was a really good moment of just like, oh yeah, you know, there's a good acting range to that character's voice actor.
Completely agree. If there was an Autobot to sort of, you could say this was like their episode, in many ways this was a Bumblebee episode, even though he didn't feature in all of it.
Yeah. I mean that and Jazz likewise. Like if anything, if I were to label it anyone, it would almost be like a Jazz episode for at least the first half. But yeah, Bumblebee gets some good moments going on here.
With the Autobots now restored, they analyse the situation and what their next move should be. Everyone boards Skyfire and heads to the launch pad where the rocket is based. With 30 seconds to go until the rocket is launching, the Decepticons board it because it is bound for Cybertron. Ratchet and Prime are also able to leap onto the rocket, with the plan being Ratchet will disconnect the satellite and Prime will guide it to its original intended destination of Earth's orbit. Megatron is furious when he realises that they're trying to wreck his plan and begins firing at them. Back with Skyfire, Jazz climbs onto the front of him, outside, literally on top of him, and just cranks up his brand new speaker system, and creates, as it's phrased in the show, a musical sonic boom, which is a great phrase. If there is not a band called that, there needs to be. It is such a good phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. And who could have foreseen that random scene of Jazz testing out his speakers would be foreshadowing for the end of this episode? I certainly didn't.
And basically, Jazz's speakers disrupt the rocket and its sensors. They are able to disconnect the satellite and throw it into orbit as the Decepticons abandon ship. At Autobot HQ, Sparkplug and Ratchet are arguing over who was the one to actually save the day, which results in them being reminded that they have all helped to fix things in a lot of different ways. Ratchet saying during this argument, "You wouldn't know a microchip from a potato chip."
I did like that one.
Yeah, and the episode ends. Bit of a weird final scene, that, I've got to say, with like the argument thing. It didn't really make sense, and it didn't even make sense in my notes, quite frankly. It did just feel like very, like, we've got this bit of the script, put it in there.
Yeah, like I feel like what they were going for was to kind of play with the idea of like, oh, we've seen the Autobots being kind of like evil, and you know maybe there's still a bit of their evil left because you know they're arguing with each other. But that was overshadowed for me by the fact I find it really hilarious that the end of this episode is basically all of them laughing it off and just like, we did so much damage to that airfield. Oh, what a day!
Thought of it like that.
How hilarious! You know, remember that time Optimus Prime broke a jet over his knee, which was legit great. I really liked that. And it's just like, yeah, they're just laughing it off because we've seen like we had that episode like a few episodes back where you know they ended up having to go back and clean up all the mess they'd made. This time I just like, well, what are you gonna do? And that was it. That was like cue the credits.
I almost feel like, Andy, now that you said it like that, that was almost foreshadowing for something that happens in one of the later episodes we're going to be talking about today. in a weird sort of way.
Could be.
So overall, Andy, that episode, overall thoughts?
Yeah, it was all right. Like, I mean, I did enjoy watching, like I say, Optimus Prime breaking a jet over his knee. That's all I needed. Apparently, like, never mind Optimus Prime playing basketball that I mentioned earlier. Like Optimus Prime, you know, breaking stuff over his knee, also very good. So yeah, there was some fun scenes in it. It just like, I would just have liked them to see them do more with this whole like personality change thing and to really go for it. Again, this is almost weirdly one of those ones where I'd love to see like a multi-part story of that sort of thing where you can have a big cliffhanger of like, oh my god, you know, now the Autobots are stealing all the energy and, you know, they're trying to get back to Cybertron because they've become the evil ones. Like, what happens then? It doesn't really quite follow through on that, but it maybe just doesn't have the time to follow through on that. But hey, there's some good stuff in here. It's like you said up top, like very much like good moments rather than maybe like good episodes outright. And I think this is a prime, with every pun intended, version of this where it's like, yeah, there's some really cool moments that you can point out, but maybe not the best episode like in terms of its overall narrative.
Yeah, Prime destroying jets was great.
Yeah, I also made a note. I can't actually remember this, but I clearly saw it at the time that he threw a satellite into orbit. That sounds like a thing Optimus Prime would do, and I wrote
that
it down.
I think was when they detached the thing from the rocket that had the Decepticons on it. I think Ratchet gave it to him, and then he just basically threw it,
just lobbed it, yeah,
into orbit. Because Prime's got really good aim,
That sounds like a thing that would happen. The final thing that I didn't know earlier that I really enjoyed and also found funny from an animation point of view, like when there's that skirmish at the start, like Ratchet kind of catches Rumble, but Rumble then transforms into his cassette form, so Ratchet just like fumbles him, just like, oh no, I'll just pick up the cassette. And as he picks up the cassette, Rumble just transforms again, and Ratchet's like, oh no, now what do I do? And it's just like, I just wanted that to go on forever, where he just like keeps grabbing him in one form, then he transforms into the other and drops him, and then just does the whole thing again. Because that was a really, that feels like one of those moments where they were probably like, the direction in the script was just like Ratchet and Rumble have a fight, and somebody just decided they were going to do something fun with it, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's like the looping gif that you want, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, just actually to focus on that note before we move on to the next episode, I really, really like that. I don't know why I didn't note it down on my notes in hindsight, but because it was actually something different. In terms of like, how does like, the mini cassette Decepticon escape? It's actually quite a shrewd move, just transforming like that. I really, really like that.
Yeah, and I feel like Transformers is peppered with those sort of moments where you can't really tell whether it's something that was written into the script of like, make this a thing that they do, or whether it's just the animators just picking up like a basic like direction and running with it. But there are a whole bunch of bits like that in kind of like in the movie and in the series where you get these cool little encounters where it's just like, it's actually like, and again, it's not just your pew pew lasers, it's actually, something a little bit different. And yeah, it's definitely fun when they do that kind of stuff.
So from there, everybody, we now move to episode 11, Microbots. We begin in a jungle-like location where a couple of intrepid explorers / archaeologists are doing what I've described, Andy, as a very amateur-looking dig site, trying to search for something. They end up finding metal, which, upon further digging, and by further digging, I mean a lot of digging, it resembles something like a spacecraft. Quote unquote from the male archaeologist, the Mayans didn't have spacecrafts.
Yeah, this is like showing all of his years of like historical research. Like, they didn't have spaceships. I also like here how like this episode sort of starts with them, just finding like a vase or something that's like 1300 years old, and it escalates very quickly to, and now we found a spaceship. It's like, surely with your metal detectors you might have noticed that first, not the kind of like the little bit of China ware that the bit of pottery that you'd found first. But hey, priorities, I guess. Yeah, depends what you're looking for.
They surmise that the ship could be millions of years old. At Decepticon HQ, Soundwave has somehow... why am I saying somehow? Soundwave is watching a news broadcast on television and brings Megatron over because they are reporting about the strange ship. They show a picture of it, or the back end of it, because the rest of it's stuck in the mud, and Megatron immediately recognises it as a Decepticon ship. And of course, must have it. We now cut to Autobot HQ, where Perceptor, randomly in the spotlight, sure, is tending to a broken chip from Ironhide, utilising a device that enlarges the object in question so he can fix it up good and proper before returning it to its normal size. Now, remember, Andy, in a previous episode how Cliffjumper was just accusing... who was it? It was accusing Mirage, just outwardly, with no reason whatsoever. Just being... quite frankly, being a bit of a dick. That's the easy way to phrase it. Well, this time it was Brawn's turn to do that, because he was just calling out Perceptor like there was no tomorrow. It's like, the heck, man? I get he doesn't go out into the field much, which is kind of the crux of the argument, but it's like, come on, mate. Let up.
Yeah, there's definitely... It's always interesting to see a bit of the Autobot beef that is clearly going on that you don't get to see normally. And, I mean, to be fair, again, this actually more than the Cliffjumper, like, Mirage thing, sort of feels like it works in terms of character. Because, like, Brawn is, like, always on the front line, stealing Megatron's gun and shooting him with it and doing all the cool stuff like that. And you can kind of get his point of view of like, well, Perceptor just hangs around, back at home and just shrinks things and makes them bigger again. Like, what's the deal? Like, he's not, he'd better be on a lower salary than me because I'm doing all the real work here. So I do kind of like that as making good use of the characters and their traits to back up the point. Also, I just really like Perceptor, so I was just excited that was a Perceptor episode.
It's weird, like, Perceptor is one of those Autobots. I can't remember if I mentioned this before when he was randomly introduced in a past episode. But it's one of those things where I'm just not familiar with Perceptor. It's like a lot of Transformers I've watched is just maybe has been in the background, but just never actually had focus. So it was quite weird, actually, suddenly thinking, oh, Perceptor's like front and center of this. All right, this is different.
Yeah, and I think I might have mentioned this when he like randomly appeared in one of the other episodes. I'd sort of like half remembered that he was like only really introduced in the movie, or at least kind of like later than that. So it's kind of like weird seeing him at this point, because in my mind he's always like a later generation of Transformer. But no, here he is with like kind of, sort of talking about some of the sort of potentially like weak things that Transformers could transform into. Like, he is just a microscope. Or everyone else is a car or a jet or, something like that. But no, he's just a microscope.
A microscope with a rocket.
Yeah, that does change the calculus a little bit, I guess. But it's and there's nothing wrong with microscopes. But when your leader's a big truck and you're just a microscope, it seems a little. Maybe he got the short straw, but again, it fits his character, and it's one of those ones where I just really like the character's voice. Like, I think Perceptor has a really good voice in this, so I'm all for just lots of Perceptor talking. I'm in for that.
Bumblebee actually comes to the defense of Perceptor, it's worth noting, and even Prime is then the one to actually break up the discussion, because Prime has to be the mediator when there is an Autobot argument. But Perceptor highlights when Prime is saying, I need everyone to come with me and roll out right now. Perceptor is just like, I have so much to do! I need to finish repairs! I can't possibly leave! And Prime just acquiesces to the request and just goes, sure thing, Perceptor. Sure thing. So Prime, Brawn, Ratchet and Bumblebee drive to South America, Andy. just South America, nowhere in particular. But drive to South America to stop Megatron from likely wanting to acquire the newly discovered ship. We cut to the Decepticons, who are, as I've put it, clearing a large area of the jungle. And the reason that they're doing this is because they want to avoid satellite detection, so they are not flying to the ship. Which, you know what, Andy? Good planning from Megatron. Good planning.
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe they should have done that more frequently when they were trying not to let the Autobots get wind of their plans. But, they're learning, so that's good to see.
Learn by experience. But you know who didn't learn by experience, Andy? Starscream. Because he has a great interaction with Rumble that results in a giant snake wrapping around him and Starscream being terrified of it. That was great. Yeah.
It's also a really enjoyable kind of... Starscream is a figure of fun for the other Decepticons. Like, as much as he's like, I'm going to be leader, and they're all just like, oh, don't look up, don't look behind you, just stand there for a bit. Yep, that's it, you've been wrapped in a snake. And yeah, Starscream's reaction to that is priceless.
Also, we got to see Ravage take on a big cat.
Yeah, I mean, that was... I think I've seen, like, video clips or GIFs or something of that before and was just like, oh, that's fun. So it was nice to see the episode that came from and be like, oh, that's fun. So yeah, I like that quite a lot.
The Autobots are not having much of a better time trying to go through the jungle, but you know what they did, Andy? They found the Decepticons' trail that they had laid and just followed them. Silly Decepticons, cover your tracks. Megatron and co. arrive at the ship where the archaeologists are about to try and open it, but the Decepticons quickly put a stop to that and scare them off. And Andy, you know how like you'd think if a ship is really old, might be a bit delicate, you might want to take care when opening it. I wouldn't think just blowing a giant hole in the side of it would be a way to do that.
I mean, it's a very Decepticon way of dealing with a problem. It's like, I would just blow a hole in it, it'll be fine. So, and I guess it seemed as they seemingly knew what the ship was. Maybe they knew that it would be up to that. So I guess I'll let them have that.
So Megatron is now in possession of an energy maximizer. It's a glowing green crystal. Sound familiar, people? Just saying. Which he acquires via the use of cyber forceps to disconnect it from the device it was being held in.
not just normal forceps, cyber forceps.
I had to write that down. Now, according to Megatron, this is the same device that actually powered the Decepticon ship when coming to Earth from Cybertron. So that's how much energy we're talking about here, people. It's then implanted into Megatron's chest, and when the Autobots arrive to try and take them out, the Autobots are just immediately done for. Like, Megatron is just overpowered at this point and just wipes out Prime with one shot. Autobots are being shot down left, right, and centre, all by Megatron, which, I want to note this, Andy, and this is kind of a recurring theme in this episode. There was some really great animation in this episode. Like, top-notch quality stuff of just the action going on. This was one of the first instances of that, when Megatron was just firing on all cylinders with this.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Like, it's this episode definitely feels like another one that's had a bit of more sort of time and care and attention put into it, at least in some considerable, significant spots, and that is probably one of them.
So as mentioned, the Autobots are just being taken out, all by Megatron, and Prime is being tended to by Smokescreen. Who? I don't know. Smokescreen, apparently. Sure, I'll take that at face value. And Prime is very concerned that Megatron now has the heart of Cybertron. Andy, I'm derailing the conversation for a second. Because this thing has been referred to as, the energy maximizer, now the heart of Cybertron. These are, to me, these are two very different things in scale. And they both just seem to, it's almost like someone didn't get the memo in the script, because it feels like it goes from being pretty important to really freaking important.
Yeah, because it kind of starts out as just, this week's power generation device, and then the next thing you know, it's basically the creation matrix, but for Decepticons, which is a really cool thing, especially given that, like, at this point in the cartoon, we hadn't really heard of the creation matrix, so it's just like, okay, this is kind of like a super important piece of Transformers lore here, but it's sort of very strange how it goes from just like glorified battery to basically our holy grail in the course of like 2 minutes. But I'm into the heart of Cybertron idea. I'm into the fact that like Megatron has like a chest plate like where it fits in the same way that Prime has one for the Matrix. It's like, this is all good Transformers lore. I just don't know why it sort of came from such a throwaway place.
So, anyway, Smokescreen, who is sent to make a distraction in the form of... Can you guess what his distraction might have been, Andy?
Is it really loud music?
Mate, you are so close. It's a smokescreen. And ultimately, this leads to a bunch of Decepticons being buried under some rubble. Because the Autobots are intelligent, everybody. The Decepticons sometimes just aren't. Back at Autobot HQ... loads of them are banged up, battered and bruised from the battle, and Perceptor is on hand to assist, though Brawn, once again, has some choice words for Perceptor, but Prime kind of puts his foot down and basically says, Brawn, stop it, or you'll have to answer to me. It's like, when you get on Prime's bad side, it's like, the heck, mate. It takes a lot to get to that point.
Yeah, this is Optimus Prime's, like, equivalent of, like, go to your room without dinner. It's just like, no more messing. This is serious now.
Perceptor is working on Power Glide and is using the same device as earlier I mentioned about the chip being enlarged and shrunk, when suddenly the power goes out. The reason being is that Prime has diverted all power to something that they are working on. But Perceptor is suggesting, well, I've got an idea for how we could probably sort this. What if we made some Autobots become microscopic in size to go inside Megatron, using his, and I've tried to write this down phonetically, Andy, because I couldn't believe this was actually what it was called. The transmatroduction beam.
I'm glad you managed to get that, because I maybe I didn't have my volume turned up enough, but I didn't quite get what was said there, and I was like, okay, well, whatever jargon it is, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, good to know that Perceptor watched Inner Space like shortly before this whole adventure began.
So yes, that ultimately is decided. Let's do that. So Perceptor, Bumblebee, and Brawn are the team made. This seems like a bad idea. Like, honestly, like, why would you do that? But they are the ones that are shrunk down to size, and Power Glide is tasked with delivering them to Megatron. Now, Andy. This might be the best scene in all of Transformers. So, for context, the Decepticons have got out of the rubble and whatnot. We then cut to what I would best describe as the Decepticons' equivalent of a drunken campfire, where they've each got an Energon cube, and they're just drinking Energon like they're just drunk. We're getting lots of, like, drunk speak. There's Megatron kind of going, things were better on Cybertron, and stuff like that. It is freaking great. Even gets to the point where Rumble, and Thundercracker are just falling over drunk on Energon, and they even just start chanting, "Energy! Energy!" at some point. It's just, what is going on? And then after all the drunken ramblings, Megatron just starts to pass out drunk, as does every Decepticon, apparently. This is just such a trip. And because Megatron is drunk, he doesn't notice Power Glide until it's far too late. And all the other Decepticons are just flat out, just passed out drunk at this point. So Megatron then decides to head off to Autobot HQ by himself to take out all the Autobots.
Yeah, I really love the part of that where he's basically like, Decepticons attack, and they all just like, they're either all already out or they just slump over. It's like, oh no, guess I'm on my own.
This scene, mate, was incredible.
It is utterly ridiculous, but it is kind of fun. Like, again, clearly all the voice cast having fun. Like, great, we get to do drunk robots this week. Bring it on. We'll do some good drunk robots. Yeah, drunk Megatron is great. Just like, I hate my disguise on Earth. It sucks. Why can't I be a tank? And it's like, we'll G2 Transformers Megatron. You'll get your time. But yeah, like all of that stuff is kind of fun, and it's one of those things. I really want to know whether they wrote that in just to have like a good way of like this group getting inside Megatron's body, or whether somebody was just hell bent on like, we need drunk Megatron. I insist that we write drunk Megatron into this series at some point.
So, as you mentioned there, just to sort of, because we could talk about this all night, but I appreciate we still have more to discuss. As you alluded to there, the Autobot party are able to successfully get inside Megatron. And inside Megatron, they're wandering around, and at this point, Perceptor makes it known for the first time, Andy, they have 2 hours to get in and get out, because otherwise they're going to return to normal size. And I think as one of the Autobots says, they just go, "Oh, good to know."
Yeah, should probably have like signaled that up front that there's a time limit on this mission, but hey ho. Also, kind of talking about like animation quality stuff, I really like how a lot of like the inside of Megatron looks a bit like the inside of Unicron when we get to like the movie later on. Like a lot of the design stuff and the weird sort of like, I don't know, a lot of like ball-shaped things inside Transformers apparently, but I like that there's like a tonal consistency there that is just like, oh yeah, this is what the inside of Transformers look like apparently, and it's nice that it's kept consistent across various stories.
That actually brings up an interesting question, because what year was the movie released? Was it 86?
Yeah. So that was kind of well after this. I imagine they again, like both animated by the same studio. I imagine they probably had similar kind of like design documents. May even have had similar character designers for the two. But it's just kind of an interesting like, this is not like completely different to what we see later with Unicron.
Also, I was just thinking maybe this was like the proof of concept for that in some ways.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe.
So, the way I've described this, and I think I've got my really old movie reference right here, Andy, but this is basically now akin to the film A Fantastic Journey, when a group of scientists have to like go inside a human body to like get rid of like some kind of thing that's lodged inside someone.
Yeah, there are so many movies, and again, like this was a thing that I feel like every Saturday morning cartoon did at some point of the like, we have to shrink and go inside a body. It's at this time it's a robot body, but yeah, it's a classic trope, but it's also one of those things that's always kind of fun as well. So I again, this is one of those episodes I wish it had a bit more time to do like inside Megatron's body stuff, because it kind of has to rush through it a little bit, but it's still kind of enjoyable.
So the three Autobots are having to outrun internal defences of Megatron, which Brawn is able to just demonstrate by his sheer brute force and strength that he can just take him out no problem. But another danger that they are having to tangle with is if Megatron makes any sudden moves, all of his internal compartments and such, or components, will move. For example, if he moves his arm to like check his watch, which doesn't exist, all the bits inside that corresponding area will move. Because at the time that happened, they were in Megatron's shoulder. Continuity. I like it. At this point, at Autobot HQ, Teletran is aware that Megatron is closing in. He is 100 miles away. ETA, Andy, 10 minutes. That's some fast travel even when you're drunk.
Yeah, I did see like somebody mentioned that this is because I was kind of like looking up this episode specifically online, and I did see somebody noted that like this is the episode where we learn how fast Megatron can fly. Much like we learned like about Starscream and his like flight capacity. Today we get to do the same math for Megatron apparently. Although I wish we'd been told like how close he was in astroseconds, but.
Back inside Megatron, the team become aware of the fact that Megatron is horizontal and is likely because he is flying. Good deduction, everybody.
I mean, he could still have been drunk. I mean, that would also have like explained why he was horizontal. Like, and no, he's probably still just out of it. You know?
That caught me off guard. Sorry. That's adding additional pressure to the situation when they end up at Megatron's brain. Which Brawn, in my opinion, Andy, quite rightly, wants to bash Megatron's brain in.
Yeah, I mean, two things here. One, yeah, like, there's not really a very good explanation of, like, no, you can't do that. It's like, why not? I mean, surely this solves not just the immediate problem, but also the longer term problem of, you know, Megatron wanting to destroy take over the universe, blah, blah, blah. I also really like, and it's put forth as like a plot point, but it feels a lot like Shade, where I think it's Brawn when they get to Megatron's brain being like, it's really quiet in here. It's like that sounded like some real Shade. It's because he's flying and not thinking about anything else. But it's just like if I went into somebody's brain and just said, oh, it's really quiet in here, like, you know, I think the other person would take that personally.
And I think the reason that they gave for not destroying the brain was something to the effect of that if Megatron then like falls wildly, like his heart of Cybertron thing could explode, because apparently it's fragile, you know. But why is everything that's really important, Andy, fragile?
Yeah, well, you know, I guess like, you know, energy is a fragile thing. I get that, but still, I don't know. I'm not buying that. It's like I do think Brawn has a very good and valid plan here, but hey ho.
Outside Autobot HQ. So Andy, remember how earlier they were diverting all the power from like just the base in general because they had a little grand plan figured out? They did it to make a little energy shield. And when I mean a little energy shield, I mean literally it will cover like 2 Autobots. Like if you're going to divert all the power of the Ark into a shield, I expect this to cover a mountain.
Yeah. This does raise us. I mean, again, it raises those questions about like how much energy like the Autobots have at any point in time. But it does seem like maybe the Ark runs on like 2 AA batteries, because that's, you know, you do kind of expect, given how like grandiose it's made to sound, and it's the typical like, you know, sci-fi thing of, you know, divert all power to the force field, and then, you know, you see the big massive force field around the Starship Enterprise or whatever. So yeah, when you get kind of a little kind of weak shield, it's like, well, maybe you should have just not bothered diverting anything to it, because it's not really going to help you much.
And also considering the fact that I think when all was said and done, they estimated it would buy them 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe maybe they knew that drunk Megatron was coming, and he'd just spend 5 minutes just like banging against the force field, like, why can't I get in? I don't understand. But
back inside Megatron, Perceptor is pleading with Brawn not to damage the brain of Megatron. Here's that moment where I just mentioned, because it could make the heart of Cybertron explode. Make of that what you will, everybody. Brawn saying in response, it's their only chance. But suddenly, Megatron is about to engage a laser beam, and we see an evil kind of like dragon-like creature appear inside Megatron's brain. And it turns out this is Megatron's evil brain impulses, which I'm delighted at the fact they look like an evil dragon. So good.
Yeah. When you're so malevolent that even your like brain waves are evil and will attack things, it's like, that's surely the sign of a fearless mercenary evil leader. Perceptor determines that they can hitch a ride on one of the impulses to lead them to the heart of Cybertron. Perceptor, when they get there, is having to work very carefully to detach the heart from Megatron, because it could explode at any moment. I know what you're thinking, everybody. I thought the same thing. Do you not want that to happen in theory? But yeah,
less so about that, the better.
And again, we've shelved the idea of just destroying Megatron's brain because there's a risk that the heart of Cybertron will explode. But when your primary plan also carries a risk that the heart of Cybertron will explode, like, surely you run the numbers and say, well, maybe the brain thing is the one to go for, because sure, if it fails, the heart of Cybertron will explode. But if it succeeds, then we destroy Megatron. In fact, either outcome will result in Megatron being destroyed. So it's all good.
But Perceptor's work is being hampered because of the impulses literally getting in the way. But then Megatron breaks down the force field. And just as Megatron is about to finish them off, his abilities disappear. That's because the heart of Cybertron has been detached, and now the Autobots inside him are running out for their lives. And suddenly, I think at this point, if I remember correctly, Megatron gets shot by Prime. Megatron's down on the ground. The 3 Autobots randomly appear from some crevice of Megatron. And Megatron has got that look of, the heck? Where the hell did you come from? And then just figures it out and shouts, you filthy retro rat! And then flies away.
Yeah, it is a really great like little moment of animation that they kind of basically grow at such a speed that they basically just kind of like stamp all over Megatron on their way out. And yeah, like Megatron again is like, how much did I drink? It's like, I swear, like these Autobots just came out of me and now they're on my chest. Like, oh my god, my head.
But the episode is not done there, everybody, because the heart is about to explode and Brawn throws it into space, and then Perceptor goes into telescope mode, if I remember correctly, and once it was at a high enough distance, transforms back into regular mode, shoots a rocket, and the thing explodes. At this point, Brawn is now finally and happily willing to admit that Perceptor is a hero, and the episode ends. Nothing else to say on that.
Yeah, it's a good fun episode. Like, I enjoy the whole, like, we need to shrink and go inside somebody's body. It's kind of doubly fun when it's like, their arch enemy and nemesis. Again, I mean, having joked about the whole, like, why not just destroy Megatron's brain thing? Like, again, that's the sort of thing other series would maybe have allowed more time to play with that idea of like, look, we're inside this guy's body, we could destroy him forever, and to play with like the lottery of that and what they can do and should do and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's kind of an enjoyable episode. It is basically worth it just for like drunk Decepticons. And there was I haven't written like who said this line, but I did write a quote where somebody just said, "I hate nice things." I can't remember. I assume it's one of the Decepticons. I think that was either Megatron or Starscream, maybe. But somebody definitely said the line, "I hate nice things."
Was that during the drunk scene? It must have been.
No, it was before that, I think. So I can't remember like what the context of that was. So I'm really disappointed I didn't know who said that. Maybe it was me. Maybe that was just me just writing that. I hate nice things. I don't know.
That's just the thought you were having while watching the episode.
Yeah, absolutely plausible.
Yeah, I enjoyed the episode, but like I say, and we've sort of said it a couple of times now from when I mentioned it at the top, very much lots of great moments in this episode, but there are just a few things, like you mentioned as well earlier, this episode probably could have been a good two-parter if they could have fleshed out a lot more details and you go a lot more behind the scenes of a Decepticon, if you will. And also I just want more drunk Decepticons.
Yeah. I mean, an entire episode that's just like the Decepticon Christmas party, which are both topical for this, for the broadcast date of the show, but would also be incredibly fun. So yeah, like there's a secret episode that clearly doesn't actually exist.
From there, we go to our final episode we'll be talking about for today. That being episode 12 of season 2, The Master Builder. The episode begins with, quote-unquote, King of the Cloud Chasers, the Sultan of the Stratosphere, Ace of the Air, Power Glide. That's what he said, by the way. I'm not calling him that.
Yeah, or as I wrote in my notes, oh no, Power Glide.
I've described it as Power Glide having a joyride in the sky, because that's basically what he was doing. When suddenly, he is attacked by the Seeker Jets and is downed by Starscream. At Autobot HQ, Hoist is watching Grapple. Who? Grapple? Who the heck is Grapple? I'll just go with it. Working on a solar tower model to present to Prime, but is worried that Prime will not be impressed. But he is. However, the big concern is how will it be protected against the Decepticons? Grapple is unable to provide an answer, so therefore Prime does not grant approval on this concept. Then Teletran signals, quote-unquote, condition magenta.
because when condition red isn't enough for you.
I laughed far too much when that was said. This is in reference to Power Glide being shot down. Hoist and Grapple are the ones that roll out to go and help him without a single issue in the world. Like, literally, nothing happened. And I'm just thinking, okay, this seems a bit pointless, but sure. And after they're done fixing him, they're rolling back through a ravine. If you, on your Autobot bingo card, had Autobots in a ravine for this episode, you may check this now. While they're rolling back, Grapple is talking about how he still wants to build this tower that Prime wouldn't approve, but Hoist is protesting, quite rightly going, Prime said no, let's not talk about this. But what they don't realise is that they're being watched by the Constructicons, who ambush them and trap them in the ravine under a landslide. Now, in a twist on things, the Constructicons say that Megatron doesn't know they're there and isn't aware that they are currently speaking to you, Autobots. And they have no grievances with those two either. They go on to explain that they've ditched Megatron because he's undervalued them for too long, but they've always admired Grapple's building work from what he did on Cybertron, and they want to work with him. I'll come back to that note about admiring him on Cybertron in a few minutes, Andy. But little do they know, Megatron has eyes everywhere, and a video camera from a rock conveniently placed right next to them allows him to see the entire conversation happen. Gonna pause there for a second, I think, Andy, because there's a lot to unpack there in what has gone on. First thing I want to say, were the Constructicons on Cybertron?
No, because I thought they were... I mean, they were built in season 1. Like, they didn't come via the space bridge or anything. I'm sure they were built. I mean, I feel like I should remember the origin story from like a few podcasts ago that we talked about, but I'm pretty sure that they weren't of Cybertronian origin in this story at least. So yeah, I too have questions about how they know Grapple, but
I mean, there is an element where I am just wondering, not to spoil what's about to happen in the episode, but is Grapple just really freaking gullible?
Well, I mean, the events of this
yes, I've answered my own question
may suggest that Grapple is really gullible. And for anyone who hasn't watched a lot of Transformers, like, Grapple is not... He does not transform into grapes and apples. He's a crane. Just to be clear. I mean, I do...
The best clarification we've ever had on this podcast.
I do like... I mean, weirdly, although this is like Grapple's kind of spotlight episode, this is one of my, like, kid me is kind of excited to have, like, Hoist feature heavily in an episode, because I had a Hoist toy. It's like, it's always been sort of his sort of brother in terms of, like, toy model Trailbreaker gets all the time in season 1, but we actually get some Hoist here, so that's nice to see.
In terms of, I mean, the whole, like, Grapple being annoyed that Prime hasn't approved stuff, we've all been there, people, in life in general. We can relate to that. But I really liked the whole story with the Constructicons, because there was part of me, well, I mean, obviously we come to find out shortly, as we'll get onto, that this was kind of a plan from the Constructicons in the heat of the moment, but the way it was presented to Grapple and Hoist, I thought it was actually very well written and very well executed in terms of furthering the story. It came across really well.
Yeah, well, and this is one of those episodes that's kind of nice because it is different from the norm. Like, this is another one that breaks with the usual sort of like, here's the infinite power generator kind of plan. Like, it kind of has that because it has the whole thing that Grapple's making, but it's sort of it has a different spin on it, and it's kind of... It's sort of fun and interesting to see at least one Autobot who's kind of just like, you know, disgruntled with Prime for a reason, because, you know, it's usually most of the Autobots are kind of like fawning over him most of the time and just like, you're such a great leader, and, you know, to have somebody be like openly like, well, I think he's made a dumb decision here, I want to go do my own thing, you know, that's an interesting angle. I seem to recall that kind of like fits into sort of like Grapple's sort of tech spec bio of him being like this sort of, you know, perfectionist sort of architect who, you know, wants to craft the most incredible things and, you know, will do anything to do that. But yeah, and it's kind of doubly interesting, the fact that, you know, he's potentially willing to fall in with the Constructicons just to do that and just to achieve that. So there's definitely some interesting angles here that are sort of a bit more sort of deeper character-wise than you maybe normally get out of this show.
100% agree. Back at Decepticon HQ, the Constructicons return and they are confronted by Megatron about what the heck happened out there. I saw everything you said, and we've even showed it on a video screen. But the Constructicons go on to explain that they eavesdropped on the Autobots having that conversation, and in the heat of the moment came up with this scheme to get them to help them. But they need proof of their trust. So Megatron says, I will offer you my most prized possession. Now, Andy, when he said his most prized possession, what's the first thing you thought of?
I mean, I wasn't really too sure where that was going, and it seemed like a sort of a strange kind of bartering system in the first place. I think I was more just like, this is not really the direction I expected this to go, but okay, let's see what they're gonna do.
Because, everyone, the reason I asked that question is it turned out to be a whole bunch of Energon cubes. Which to me, begs to ask the question, does Megatron really only care about Energon? I know that's kind of been the implication since the start of the show, but he's literally just said his most prized possession is Energon.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that he has an Energon drinking problem, so I guess, you know, I mean, I feel like this might be the actual subtext of the entire series, is that actually it's not about getting the Energon to fly back to Cybertron and conquer it. It's actually just like, he just wants to drink it all. It's just like, give me all the Energon because I'm really thirsty and I just need to get hammered again to black out all the bad memories of those times that Optimus Prime beat me and Starscream said mean things about me. I just want to get drunk.
All the times that Starscream kept trying to overthrow me.
Yeah, exactly.
So as mentioned, this turns out to be a whole bunch of energon cubes. Conveniently, enough energon to build the solar tower that Grapple wanted to build. Which the Constructicons say they stole from Megatron. The Constructicons then go to a local building site with a bunch of humans, and they just literally take a whole bunch of building materials, and we start to see this alliance between Grapple, I say Grapple and Hoist, but Grapple primarily, and the Constructicons come into effect. And they start building this tower, and as we've come to realise, Andy, Transformers are really quick at building stuff because this tower goes up freaking quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually really like how like wholesome this whole sort of building montage and part of the episode is, because there's this great part where like one of the Constructicons and Grapple are just kind of like basically like swapping welding tips, and it's just like I really want to see like the Constructicons and Grapple's like YouTube video series about DIY tips of just like, you know, this is how you replace a radiator and all this kind of stuff, because they're just, you know, they're just shooting the breeze, swapping their expertise and, you know, sharing knowledge, and it's like it's like this is actually quite nice. Like this is what the world could be like if they weren't fighting over energon constantly. You know, they could just hang out and just build some stuff and, you know, just learn some things, and it's like this is really quite chill and relaxed. Like I could just kind of like it to stay like this.
The Autobot, the Transformers equivalent of like DIY SOS or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, yeah, you know, if your house is in a mess, just send for Devastator. I'm sure it'll be fine.
So, I think this might be the moment you've been waiting to discuss, Andy. At Autobot HQ, while this is all going on, Optimus Prime is playing basketball with a few other Autobots, including Trax. And we see Prime do some great moves, ultimately leading to a slam dunk. Discuss. Yep. I'll let you have your moment here. Discuss.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the writing of this episode, I really like how they make Optimus Prime just like not really get like the terminology of basketball. Is am I drooling right, Spike? He says at some point. But I also like, this is the second episode in this batch that we're talking about where some problems are happening elsewhere in the world, and the Autobots are just like, sports, we're playing sports. It's like, I mean, especially like in the first episode we talked about here, where, you know, there's, you know, the Atlanteans and the Decepticons are planning to like overthrow the planet and start by destroying Washington DC, while the Autobots are just playing American football. And then this week, like, you know, two of your kind of, you know, important troops have deserted you to go and kind of, you know, join up with a bunch of enemy troops to build an energy device that your enemies may well use to overthrow the planet. And in the meantime, like, Optimus Prime is just learning how to do 6 slam dunks with Spike. And it's like, you know, I get you've got to have some downtime, but boy do you pick bad times to just say, like, hey, Spike, tell me about some other Earth sports. I just really want to bounce a ball.
I look forward to seeing Optimus Prime engaging in baseball next.
Yeah, I mean,
and just knocking balls into the sun.
There's got to be more of these incoming now. Like two is a trend. There's got to be more like sporting endeavors from the Autobots at some point. I'll be incredibly disappointed. In fact, I'm pretty sure I seem to recall in like the end credits of season 3, there's some like sports day or like athletics thing going on involving Transformers. I could be completely misremembering that, but I'm here to put my flag in the ground right now and say there will be more Autobots playing sports at some point in this podcast.
Okay, so let's do a little foreshadowing here. Name one sport you think will appear in the show upcoming.
I mean, given that this is a US series and, you know, animated in Japan where baseball is also big, I think baseball is a fair call. I'd kind of like to see them play soccer a bit. Like, I've seen Giant Robots play soccer in other series, and, you know, I'd be up for that. I'm sort of hoping that there's going to be a point where there's an episode where the sports are the primary thing, and it's like Megatron's like, I'll defeat you this time, and, you know, let's play marbles or something, and, you know, it'll be fun.
I'm gonna say ice hockey, but then what I want to see is Megatron going, if we beat you at ice hockey, you must leave the Earth.
Yeah. By ancient Cybertronian law states that if we beat you in this penalty shootout, then you can never return.
So, that basketball game I mentioned, Trax gets a little bit injured during this, and he makes it known that he would go in for maintenance if he could actually get an appointment with Hoist. Prime is puzzled by this, and it's also now brought to his attention that Grapple and Hoist have not been here all day. So Prime sends Powerglide to go and find them. We then see a fun sequence of events where the Decepticons aren't able to enact the plans according to Grapple's blueprint, as you were alluding to a few moments ago, Andy. And we get some great moments, like you say, of Grapple teaching them how to do certain things when it comes to building. And I think one of my favourite ones, and I can't remember which Constructicon it was, is basically going, thanks for the help with that. I think you should do a few more, because I still don't get it. It's like, you can see exactly where this is going, and it's all great stuff. Now, having taught the Decepticons how to construct some vital parts of this entire structure, the Constructicons' plan is working perfectly. Powerglide then finds the device and sends a video feed to Prime, who, should note at this point, Andy, while he's sitting at Teletran 1, is still mucking around with the basketball. Don't know if you noticed that, but I sure as heck did. And he is now aware that they are working with the Decepticons, that being Grapple and Hoist. Code Blue is initiated, and the Autobots roll out.
I mean, at least it's called Code Blue, not Code Puce or something. So clearly not that serious, because otherwise it would be some weird off shade of some other colour.
Code Teal.
Yeah. Code Charcoal.
Code Maroon. What other random colours can we come up with? Where was I? Sorry. So the device has now been completed thanks to Devastator making an appearance to install the final part of it on top of it. And of course, at that exact moment, Megatron appears and Grapple and Hoist realise what happened, and they are imprisoned somewhere inside the device, but we don't know where. The Power Tower, as it's been called repeatedly at this point, has already produced over 400 Energon cubes by the time the Autobots arrive at the location. And the battle begins with the Autobots having the early upper hand, but then Devastator comes into play, and suddenly they are on the back foot. Then Ramjet... Who? Who's Ramjet? I don't know, but sure. The Decepticon Ramjet has a fun tussle in the air with Powerglide. Smokescreen, for the second episode in a row, it should be noted now, has to act as a distraction, and then ultimately manages to cause Devastator to accidentally hit the tower to a pummeling degree, thus bringing the tower down in the process. And as is traditional, when Decepticons are beaten, they retreat. Now at this point, Andy, you wonder, where are Grapple and Hoist? What's up with them? Have they just been buried? Like Skyfire was buried in ice for seemingly an eternity? And whatnot? While the Autobots are clearing the debris of this power tower, Brawn is eventually the one to find them, in what I'm describing, Andy, as the Transformers equivalent of frozen carbonite from Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And, except in this instance, Brawn is able to just smash it and break it apart.
Yeah, I mean, if only Brawn had been around in Star Wars, the whole Han Solo thing would have been far less dire. It's just I'll just smash that up, it's fine.
And then we get a little moment where Hoist and Grapple, I don't know if I forgot his name there, apologise to Prime. Prime accepts their apologies and effectively says, that's cool, go back to base and get fixed up. Then come back here and clear up your mess. And then we get a little moment of Grapple looking at his model, which for some reason was still at the real base, and then he kind of reminisces over it, and then the episode ends. I hate to sound very anticlimactic, but that's basically how it ended.
Yeah, this is the downside of having an episode that's not necessarily a big sort of grandiose plan to overthrow the world. Is it's kind of difficult to end it in any way that doesn't feel like a bit of a damp squib. I mean, I do have questions about Grapple's incredible creative abilities when they build most of that device and then someone's just how do we get to that bit at the top? And he's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. It's like, I thought you were this like genius architect. You might have thought about this a bit further in advance. And it's only like, combining to form Devastators. It's like, oh, we can fix it. Don't worry.
And even he's not actually tall enough to do it. He's got to be on his tiptoes.
Yeah. If only Optimus Prime had been there to just slam dunk it onto the top, it would have. I thought that was foreshadowing, but no, apparently not. It was just basketball. But yeah, it's a bit of a kind of a bit of an iffy end to the episode. It's definitely one where it's like, we've got some interesting ideas, but there's not that much you can do with it in 20 minutes in a kid's cartoon. But hey, Grapple was fun to see, and probably won't get another Spotlight episode, so I hope you enjoyed your time with Grapple. And that's that.
Yeah, there were fun moments in this episode, more specifically at the beginning, like I mentioned, with the Constructicons hatching their plan, like in the spur of the moment thing. I really liked that, but just by the end of the episode, it was just, yeah, sure, this happened. That's kind of how I felt about it, ultimately.
Yeah. I'm also like, I want to know, like, those 400 Energon cubes they created. Is that just like a night in for Megatron? Like, it's just like great.
Is that a lock in?
Yeah, it's like that's my weekend sorted. Like, never mind the rest. I'm happy. That's probably why he really retreats. It's like, I've got enough. I can get a few drinks in. I'm done.
So, folks, that concludes those 4 episodes of Transformers Season 2. Now, when it comes to next time, the episodes we will be doing are as follows. Episode 13, The Insecticon Syndrome. Quite a cool title.
There is. And plus Insecticons, as we know, they have a lot of awesome things that they can do, so I'm in for that.
Episode 14, Day of the Machines. Is this the Terminator crossover I've been hoping for?
Surely this is every episode, but okay.
Fair point. And then episode 15 and 16, everybody. Megatron's Master Plan, parts 1 and 2. We've got a 2-parter coming up, Andy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had the Ladybird book of Megatron's Master Plan, so I might actually remember like some of what happens in this, but weirdly in like, I remember reading this in book form, because I don't think I've seen like the cartoon version of it, so that might be an interesting one for me.
Mate, talk about deep cuts of references. A Ladybird book this time. We've gone from Timmy Mallet to Ladybird books.
Yeah, we've progressed. We've moved onwards and upwards.
Thank you very much for joining us here today on Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why not give us a follow on Twitter and or Instagram at StarscreamsPod. If you want to drop us an email, you can do so on starscreamsghostpod@gmail.com. And also, as mentioned earlier in the show, all of these episodes, if you're listening to the audio version, are available to watch in video form on YouTube. So if you actually want to see our faces and how we discuss these and the reactions of when we laugh at each other and stuff, you can do that. And of course, in this episode, you can see Andy's Santa hat. If that's not a reason to check it out enough, then there you go. And of course, I'm not even going to describe what's happening, everyone. You've got to look at the video to find out. But there you go. And of course, everybody, the episodes of Transformers we are watching are available on the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel. That being the official channel created by Hasbro, where all the Transformers episodes are available to watch completely free and 100% legally. Andy, before we wrap up for today, any additional thoughts you want to convey?
Yeah, so I've been, in tribute to the name of this podcast, I've been keeping this one in reserve from the Atlantis Arise episode. I didn't mention there's a really great Starscream line at the point where he's kind of it sounds really bad saying he's interfering with Wheeljack, but like when Wheeljack was when Wheeljack was immobilized and Starscream was kind of like, messing around with his circuitry, and Bumblebee etc come in and they basically say, we've got to stop him, he's going to like ruin Wheeljack basically, and Starscream's line in response is, ruining Autobots is my life. And that's a really good line.
Oh, there have been some great one-liners. There have been some amazing one-liners. We want to add that to the list of like Starscream quotes at some point. I'm sure we're going to do when we do our tier list of great Starscream quotes.
That could be our special like spin-off episode, Starscream's quotes.
Ah, there you go. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening and or watching once again. We hope you enjoy this festive holiday season. We are certainly going to do so. We'll be back on December the 30th with our next episode, as mentioned, and then we will continue rolling on from there next year through the remainder of Season 2 and beyond. Andy, it's been another great time, and I hope you have a lovely Christmas.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Folks, thank you very much for watching. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.